This is the new Model 30 integrated amplifier from Marantz. And according to them, this is an incredibly important product because of what it represents. You see, to them, this isn't just another SKU in a portfolio or something that represents an old product. Instead, it represents change. Because from this point onward, Marantz decided that they're going to focus more on the premium market. And what this is really an attempt to help distinguish themselves from the Denon brand. Because as some of you know, both Marantz and Denon are owned by Sound United. And this causes some people to think that, well, both products must be the same. Even though Marantz and Denon have separate engineering teams, separate people leading both businesses, it nonetheless is an association that both companies would like to break. So what Marantz has done is they've decided to come out with this new product that not only uses a completely fresh aesthetic, but it also uses a circuit that in no way, shape, or form has anything in common with what you'd find in a Denon. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put this camera on a tripod, and then we're going to take a closer look at the Model 30. Okay guys, so let's go ahead and address the elephant in the room right away. So the Model 30 definitely has a lot of unique design elements, and the main thing they were going for is aesthetic symmetry, meaning that the left and the right of the unit both look the same regardless of where you view it in your room. But what most of you are also going to notice is this almost avant-garde look that they've gone with. Up front we have round knobs, behind that we have a more traditional back plate with what they call a porthole. I hate that name, we're just going to call it a digital display right there in the center. And then the back plate is going to feature this unique reflective aesthetic that is actually curved a little bit, and this is what's going to make the Marantz Model 30 a little bit polarizing to people. I can imagine some people are going to love it and others not so much. I know that for me personally, I didn't like it at first, but after a few days, not only did I get used to it, but I actually really like it. Anyways, now let's talk about what you get with the Model 30. So this is an integrated amplifier that's capable of outputting 100 watts into 8 ohms and 200 watts into 4 ohms. It retails for $2,500 and is both designed and made in Japan. Now, each unit's going to come with a remote control. And the cool thing about this remote is if you buy it with the matching SACD network player, then this one remote will be able to control both units. Now let's go over what you get starting from left to right. So on the very left we have a power button. Next to that we have our input selector knob. Next to that we are going to have a knob for our phono stage. So they spent a lot of time on this phono stage, and they wanted to make sure that it would be capable of pairing up to not just a wide variety of turntables, but to also pair up well to a wide variety of cartridges. Next to that we are going to have some tone controls. So the bass is attenuated at 50 Hertz and the treble is attenuated at 15 kilohertz. Next to that, we're going to have our left and right balance control. Then we're also going to have our volume knob, which I have to admit, the attenuation seems very precise. Looks like it has around 200 steps or so. And then lastly, on the right, we have a 1/4 headphone jack, which will output, I believe it's 30 milliwatts into 32 ohms. So that's it for the front of the unit. Now let's take a look at the back. Okay, so here's the back of the Model 30, and look guys, it's very straightforward. The top row has a bunch of RCAs, inputs and outputs. We have CD input, a tuner input, 2 auxiliary inputs, a record in, a record out, a pre-out, a power amp in if you want to use this as just an amplifier. Beneath that, this is where you connect your turntable to. We have our well-made speaker terminals. To the right, we have a remote control in and out, and then on the bottom we have the IEC inlet for our power cord. Simple stuff, so now let's take a look on the inside. So here's the inside of the Model 30. In the center we have this shielded toroidal transformer. Now most of the time you would associate that with the power amp section, but that's not what's going on with the Model 30, because what you're essentially getting with this integrated is a dedicated, discrete preamplifier with a stereo amp thrown in. It's literally the opposite direction that most companies take when building an integrated amp, and that transformer is dedicated strictly to the preamp. Instead, power output is handled by these modules. They're Hypex NC500s, and apparently they were co-developed by Marantz and Hypex a number of years ago and were featured in Marantz's higher-end integrated amplifier called the PM10. And the whole goal was to enable these modules to see a linear frequency response regardless of the impedance load that's presented by the loudspeakers, a problem that's plagued a lot of Class D modules up until recently. The input is also going to be purely analog, and the whole goal is to replicate the sound of a Class AB amplifier while maintaining the advantages of a Class D circuit. Otherwise, this unit is very well made. We have the phono stage underneath this board here, fully shielded. Everything looks solid. This amplifier actually has some heft behind it. It's around 31 or 32 pounds. But that all means nothing if the performance isn't there, so now it's time to talk about how it sounds. Okay, so when it comes to the sound of the Model 30, first I'm going to address those of you who are already familiar with the Marantz PM8006 integrated amplifier, because what you're getting out of the Model 30 is a very similar sound, only now it's just pretty much better in every single way, as it should be given the price gap. So if you're somebody who owns the 8006 and you're asking yourself, I wonder what the next logical upgrade path would be if I want the same general sound, only better, well, the Model 30 is going to be a very logical choice. Now, for those of you who are not familiar with the 8006, this is what you can more or less expect out of this particular integrated amplifier. So what you're getting is a presentation that is all about detail, spaciousness, about giving you a sound that's energetic, yet at the same time, easy to listen to. And what they're not going for is something that gives you this big, luscious, warm sound. You're not going to get that out of the Model 30, nor are you going to get something that has that very distinct V curve. Instead, they're going for something that's more or less linear, but with just a little bit of tactical coloration here or there. So let's dive into more detail, starting with the two things that I think most of you will notice when you listen to the Model 30. The first being detail. The Model 30 is like a microscope into the recorded material. You know, information that you listen to with familiar music that's a little bit hidden in the background? Well, this integrated amplifier will likely take that information and bring it out in a way to where it sounds like it was never meant to be hidden to begin with. And the best thing is, it does this in a very natural way. The Model 30 doesn't boost treble or boost something within the frequency range to give you the illusion of more detail. It just comes out very naturally, something I don't think many people are going to complain about. Next, it's going to be that big, spacious soundstage. I normally never talk about imaging or sound staging when it comes to electronic components, but I couldn't help but notice that every single speaker that I connected to the Model 30 got a boost in terms of its ability to lay down a huge soundstage with really good focus. Again, something I don't think most people are going to complain about, because when you combine both of those talents, that effortless detail with that big sound, that's exactly what a lot of people are looking for when they step into an integrated amplifier in this class. So now let's go into even more detail, starting with the treble. So the treble, I would say, is more or less neutral, if not maybe just a little bit soft sounding. And if anything, I've noticed that this voicing has become commonplace within the hi-fi industry. And I, for one, completely welcome it, because it seems like we're almost past the days to where treble had this sibilant sound that could be very, very annoying to listen to, especially on less than perfect recorded material. Now, don't get me wrong, the Model 30 doesn't serve as a band-aid for poorly recorded material, but it does render most music to be very listenable, and if you have a high-quality recording, it definitely brings out the best of that. But like I said, the treble is mostly neutral, so it's going to reflect more or less what the inherent character of your speakers are, which is why it's very difficult to describe it being any specific way, because if you have forward-sounding speakers, that's likely what you're going to hear. If they're soft-sounding speakers, that's likely what you're going to hear. So now let's talk about the mid-range. So the mid-range takes on this very detailed and open character to it. So it's not warm-sounding. Again, it's not trying to sound like a tube amplifier in any way, but it's not thin-sounding. If anything, I would say that the upper mid-range is prominent and a little bit forward in nature. And this helps to give the sound a little bit of energy. It helps to give it a little bit of presence, but it can be too much of a good thing depending on the speakers that you run. So if you already have speakers that project in a forward way in the upper mid-range, this may not be the best match. But here's a crazy thing I noticed. I noticed that when using the auxiliary RCA inputs, that's where the upper mid-range prominence was most noticeable. But when I used the CD input, that calmed things down a bit, made it sound just a little bit more balanced and natural. Now, I'm not sure if I'm just going crazy here. Maybe the CD input is a more direct path to the circuit. I have no idea, but it's just something I noticed and I wanted to report to you guys. Otherwise, though, the mid-range is very good, and there may even be just a little bit of warmth in the lower mid-range, which leads me to the bass, and this is where the warmth comes from. Yes, it's strong. Yes, I don't think anybody's going to complain about the precision of the bass, but this is where you can tell that they went in and they added just a little bit extra, which means when you're listening to something like a kick drum, then you're going to notice that, yeah, there's almost this little visceral effect that it has to the sound. Again, it's meant to be entertaining, and I think it was a smart choice to go with. So now let's move on to some other bits of information, starting with dynamic output. So dynamic output is okay. So given the product's general size, the topology, the power output rating, the price, I would say it's exactly what you would expect. You're not going to be blown away by crescendos, but it doesn't sound flat or lifeless either. It's just, yeah, this is a dynamic piece. It sounds dynamic. You move on. Now, this is a low-level listening champion. So if you're somebody who, like me, you don't like to blast your music all the time, you're going to love this because the combination of that detail, the imaging, that slightly forward, upper, mid-range, you do not have to take the volume very high in order for your speakers to sound detailed, and if anything, nice and full sounding due to that little bump in the bass. Now, it doesn't mean that it can't go loud, though. Yes, it can drive difficult speakers like my Harbeth P3 ESRs very well, but it's all about how that power is delivered. Think of it like a European sports car versus an American muscle car. Both of them can accelerate very quickly, but a lot of, like, say, Class A, B amplifiers, they have more of that muscular sound, that sense of occasion as you crank the volume, whereas the Model 30, it just sounds the same, it just gets louder. Which is a good thing because the tonality of the integrated amplifier doesn't really change as you crank the volume. Now, of course, I don't listen at crazy levels because it's just not to my taste, so I can't be reliable in terms of listening at rock concert volumes, but in my experience so far, yeah, it can get plenty loud. Anyways, guys, that's just about it in terms of performance. I mean, look, the Model 30 is not going to be for everybody, but when you pair it up to the right speakers, I'll be honest with you, I think at least half of you watching this video right now would never be able to even tell that you were listening to a Class D amplifier without the foreknowledge at least. So anyways, guys, so now let's talk about different speaker matching with the Model 30 and what I feel really pairs up well to it. And then I'll go over to caveats and then we'll wrap this up. Okay, so the good news is that the Model 30 has the kind of sound that should complement most loudspeakers. So if you own something right now that has a reputation for giving off a relatively neutral sound and or something that's known for having a warm and smooth presentation, those speakers should make for a natural match with the Model 30. To give you some examples, the Dynaudio Evoke series, Bacart speakers, the Harbeth P3s or Model 30s, or anything that has a classic British sound to it should all pair up very well to the Model 30. You also have Wharfedale, Tecton, Revel, and many other speakers that again should pair up very well to them. Now, what I can't tell you is how something like an Electrostat or a Planar would pair up well. It's just too much of a wild card for me to say. Speaking of wild cards, I have a funny suspicion that Totem acoustic speakers would make for a fantastic match with the Model 30 because they have a reputation for delivering a huge soundstage. Usually they have no problems revealing subtle information, only their upper mid-range tends to be thin. So I have a funny feeling that the combination of the Model 30 with most Totem products would be absolutely stunning for the money. Now, examples of speakers that I would hesitate to recommend would be, let's just say, most products from the KEF portfolio, because those speakers are known for their detail and they also feature a prominent upper mid-range across most models. And I feel like that could be too much of a good thing for a lot of people, unless you just really love that sound and you want to double down on it. I would also hesitate to recommend any speaker that's known for having a somewhat dry presentation. Let's say select models from B&W or Focal. Again, that may make for a rather uninspiring sound. But again, you never know until you try it, but it's not something that I would purchase blindly if you own speakers like that. Anyways, guys, that's going to be it. The power delivery should be good enough for most people, at least to sane listening volumes. Look, if you have a huge room and you want to blast your music at rock concert levels, then you will likely need something a little more powerful than this. But otherwise, it's a pretty versatile solution, but it's not perfect, so let's go over some of the caveats now. Okay, so look, most of the caveats are fairly straightforward. Not everybody's going to like the look or the sound or the fact that it doesn't use all metal casework. When it comes to the headphone output, no, it's not going to replicate the performance of a dedicated headphone amplifier. It's more there for your convenience. But I think the biggest complaint that I have about the Model 30 has to do with the tone controls. Now, don't get me wrong, I am happy that they are there, but I don't like how they were executed. For example, you can only activate the tone controls via a remote. You can't activate it via a button on the front, nor can you enable or disable the circuit based on whether or not you physically adjust them. So that's something that I wish was different on the Model 30. And I also don't completely understand the frequency point that the tone controls are tuned to. For example, the treble is tuned to 15 kilohertz. That is really high. When most people go to adjust treble, what they're really trying to do is to adjust something between 2 to 8 kilohertz. A lot of you have hearing that drops off at or even below 15 kilohertz, and in the real world, when you start to adjust it, can you hear a difference? Yeah, but it's not really that impactful, so I think some people are going to be disappointed with that. The bass is at 50 hertz. I think a case can be made both for and against that point. I do wish it was just a little bit higher. But that's about it as far as my complaints are concerned. Otherwise, it's a pretty well-rounded unit, pretty straightforward, so that leads me to my final thoughts. Okay, so to wrap this up, look, I have to give credit to the Marantz team for being bold with the release of the Model 30, because they knowingly infused design elements that would be polarizing among enthusiasts, starting with the aesthetics. It has a very unique look, meaning that some people are going to love it, whereas others are going to hate it. That just comes with the territory of something like this. And then there's going to be the use of a Class D amplifier. Again, another hot spot for audiophiles. Some people are going to give it a chance, and they're going to love the sound, whereas others won't even give it a try because it uses Class D amplifiers, thinking that, hey, if it uses Class D, then it ain't for me. You know what? I should merch that idea. And then lastly, there's going to be the use of plastic parts on the front of the unit. Now, I have experience with manufacturing and running a hi-fi business, and I know that if they were to use metal design elements for the front of the unit, then it would raise the cost by $500 to $700 due to the unique shape of it all. But a lot of consumers don't have that experience. They're just going to see plastic and a price tag of over $2,000 and think they're getting ripped off. Whereas in reality, the build quality is very solid. I mean, it's nearly as heavy as a musical Fidelity M6SI, which is no slouch. But still, I understand the compromise and why some people would be bothered by that. But overall, though, I think the Model 30 has it where it counts the most, which is performance. I think it offers a good value for the money for people who are looking for that kind of sound. And that leads me to my own personal and subjective thoughts on the Model 30. So, starting with the aesthetic, you have to bear in mind that when I took it out of the box, I wasn't given access to pictures. I had no idea what I was getting. It was almost like opening a Christmas present in the sense that there was just a complete mystery behind it. So when I pulled the unit out of the box, I remember thinking, oh my God, what did they do? What did they do? I did not like the aesthetic at all. But what's interesting is that after a few days, it grew on me. And now here I am. I actually really like the look of it. And the same thing actually occurred with the sound. After I hooked it up, I was like, the sound's okay. It's not that special. It's not bad. It's just okay. But then after about a week, I grew to really like the sound as well. So that's been my experience with the Model 30, is that my initial reaction to it was negative, but it didn't take long for me to settle in and to really and truly appreciate what it brings to the table, both in terms of its unique look as well as its sound. Anyways, that's just my take on the Model 30, guys. Stick around if you're into comparisons. Otherwise, appreciate you checking out the video, and until next time, peace. Okay guys, so first up, I'm going to compare the Marantz Model 30 to the Parasound Halo Hint 6 integrated amplifier. Now before I begin, I need to let you know that I'm going to bypass most specifications in this comparison section, so if you're interested in information like that, just click on the description box below and I have a link to the product pages where you can check all of it out for yourself. Instead, I want to focus strictly on how they compare in terms of raw performance or sound. In fact, the only specification I really need to mention is price. So the Model 30 retails for $2,500, whereas whereas the Hint 6 retails for $3,000. Yes, that is more money, but I still feel like it's close enough in this range to where a lot of people may be cross-shopping both units. So when it comes to performance, the big question is, well, how do they compare? And the answer is they're actually quite different from one another. So the Model 30 is going to be more for somebody who wants that open, clean presentation. You want big imaging, and you're all about listening to music and enjoying all those subtle little details rendered to you in a very obvious way. If that's you, the Model 30 is going to be the better bet. When it comes to bass performance, they're actually very similar, both airing towards the warm side of neutral and having otherwise a similar sound in that regard. When it comes to the dynamic output, they're both very similar in that regard. And otherwise, though, that's going to be the major difference, is the Marantz will have a slightly lighter, more open sound to it, again, with big imaging and quite a bit of detail. Now, the Hint 6 is going to have its advantages. For example, in the mid-range, it's going to take on more of a warm sound with a bigger sense of scale to it. It's not going to be as energetic in the upper mid-range as the Marantz, and it's also going to have a slightly more muscular presentation to it overall. Now, both units are not exactly powerhouses in the sense that you do have to crank the volume quite a bit in order to tap into their power output capability. Both are going to be very good, but they're going to have a different type of presentation that's going to appeal towards different types of listeners. So now let's move on to the second comparison. Okay, so lastly, let's talk about how the Model 30 stacks up to the new Yamaha AS1200. As a reminder, the Model 30 retails for $2,500 US, whereas the Yamaha retails for $2,800. Now first, a comment on build quality, because I feel like your money goes a long way with the Yamaha in terms of the materials used. Most of the chassis is made out of metal, and it also features a large turtle transformer, large filter capacitors, and it just uses more of the quality parts that we're used to in an audiophile component that's put together in a very impressive way for the money. Now, when it comes to sound, though, again, they're going to be very different from one another, just like the differences between the Marantz and the Parasound. The Marantz is going to have the advantage in terms of having an open, more cleaner sound. It's going to lay down a bigger sound stage, and it's going to be better at retrieving subtle bits of information within a recording. It's going to have a lighter sound when compared to the Yamaha, and it's going to be slightly, and I do mean slightly, more refined sounding along the top end. The bass performance is actually going to be a little bit thicker sounding than the Yamaha, and that leads me to the advantages that the Yamaha has. So the Yamaha has a bigger, fuller, more muscular sounding presentation. The mid-range is going to have just a little bit more warmth to it, and over time it actually sounds more natural than the Marantz, because even though out of the box the Yamaha has quite a bit of prominence in the upper mid-range, a lot like the Model 30 does, that will calm down over time, leaving you with a more balanced and more natural sounding mid-range. The top end isn't going to be quite as airy and refined sounding as the Model 30, but it has a natural grit to it that again seems to give it a more natural sounding presentation in terms of tone. And that is going to be the bass. The bass is going to be slightly cleaner, believe it or not, than what you get out of the Model 30. And again, it's all about the tone, and I feel like the Yamaha has it beat there. But it's not going to give you that same open presentation that you're going to get out of the Model 30. So as always, it just boils down to what you want. Anyways, guys, that's going to be it for my total take on the Model 30. Thanks for watching, and until next time, peace.